Alright then, we need to talk about hot locations. Don't get me wrong, over the first few weeks, maybe even months of playing, I was a big fan of hot locations. I fully subscribed to the philosophy given out by Second Dinner, where they're there to mix up the gameplay and encourage players to play different decks. Unfortunately, at least recently, they've not been doing that. But first, what is a hot location? More familiar to most players will be featured locations. A new location is added to the game every single week, usually on a Wednesday, and for the first few days of this location's existence, it will be a featured location. Featured locations are 40% more likely to appear than other locations in the game, and that just means that you are more likely to see these brand new locations the week that they come out. Which is fine. Every time new content is added to a game, generally players will want to see that new content, so it's good. Mostly. I don't necessarily think the Second Dinner should get rid of featured locations, maybe tone them down so that they last one day, but hot locations are something else entirely. Every Sunday for 24 hours, the game has a hot location. This is not a new location, it's one of the old locations that's been in the game potentially ever since the beginning, and that location gets a percentage increase. In fact, hot locations come up even more frequently than featured locations, as hot locations are 60% more likely to appear in a game. Now, this is obviously slightly less exciting because it isn't new content, it's something that players have seen before, but perhaps it's going to be a location that doesn't get seen quite as often and will mix up the gameplay in a different way. Well, it doesn't exactly mix anything up so much as really make the meta stale for a day or two. Take for instance today's hot location, Onslaught's Citadel. Ongoing effects are already very, very powerful. Wong and Onslaught and Mystique are cards that I've even talked about on this channel, but they pop up in a lot of meta decks across the board. Whether you're running a Patriot deck, the Exodia combo, or even just Iron Man, Onslaught Citadel will make your deck a heck of a lot better. Onslaught Citadel also has counters. Enchantress will disable all ongoing effects currently active when the card is played. Rogue will steal one of your opponent's ongoing effects and claim it as her own. So you see a meta forming now, the ongoing meta, the 24 hours meta for a day ongoing meta, where it's got the meta, the counter, and then I guess the odd deck that just ignores Onslaught Citadel entirely. Maybe they run Scarlet Witch or Storm or Magic just to get rid of the area whenever it does come up. And that's fine, that's all well and good every now and then, but every single week there are some players that just choose not to log into the game because they don't like these one-day metas. The problem is if you unlock a new card and you're excited to use that new card, but then today's hot location isn't really compatible with that card, I guess you just can't use it for the day. Try again tomorrow. And when I say it's okay every now and then, yeah, that's fine for featured locations, for new locations in the game. But at the moment, there are 4 days out of every 7 where there is a location that comes up more frequently than everything else. And if that location is particularly skewed towards a certain type of deck, like today's is, this causes problems. The biggest problem a card game can have is when the meta gets too repetitive. This is why, in theory, having new locations every week is such a good thing. But when these new locations facilitate only a specific type of gameplay and cause players to play with a specific deck for 4 days out of every 7, that's a problem, and players are going to get bored of that type of gameplay. Now don't get me wrong, hot locations can be very cool. In fact, some of them are pretty sweet. When a location comes up that isn't common at all, and it's like, oh wow, they're going to see a lot of play with this weekend, like potentially Sanctum Sanctorum or Bar with No Name, that could be exciting for a bit. Unfortunately, if you wanted to play quite a bit of Marvel Snap in one day, and the location makes the game not fun for you or starts to get old or repetitive real quick, that is just an issue putting off players. Maybe an alternative would just have them be more frequent but only last an hour. Maybe have them just at random times for 1 hour at a time. I don't know. I think the problem is the frequency of them. Again, 3 days a week with the featured locations is enough, but then that hot location, it is just that little bit too much. Again, I want to add, I really do appreciate the thought behind the hot locations and featured locations. I get that they're trying to mix up the gameplay. The problem is, in reality, it does the opposite of that. What makes things worse is when a hot location or featured location is something that you can't truly utilize because you lack one of the best cards for that location. Take the Space Throne, for example. Only one card can be played here for each player. If you've got Green Goblin in your collection, you're probably just going to win the Space Throne. The only thing that beats that is if your opponent happens to predict your Green Goblin and plays a card there the same turn. I guess they could play Sunspot, the Collector, or Morpheus, or a card that will gain stats over time. But a lot of the time, Green Goblin just wins that lane every time. And so if you don't have the card yet, you just might not want to play Marvel Snap all day. I wanted to get this video out today and get this off my chest because Onslaught Citadel, I think, is a symptom of a larger problem. Personally, I've quite enjoyed today's hot location, but I've only played a little bit of Marvel Snap today, and if I wanted to play too much more, I think I would get quite bored quite quickly. Even in the small amount that I did play today, I saw so much Enchantress, Rogue, Onslaught, Iron Man, and Patriot. What these hot locations do is they narrow the scope of the meta. It would be awesome if they somehow expanded the scope of the meta. We do sometimes see a big issue with featured locations when they also help a certain archetype. Most recently, when the Peak came out, it just buffed Mr. Negative decks, which was already the most powerful deck in the game. This just made those decks more powerful. So if you didn't happen to have the cards to make a Mr. Negative deck, you didn't have a very good week.